Welcome to the Eagle Claw YouTube channel. The effects of the mobilization decision in Russia made all citizens act with spontaneity. The only focus of the Russian government right now is to win the Ukrainian war, whatever the consequences. In fact, for the sake of winning the war, the Russian administration does not hesitate to use its citizens and soldiers as pawns or cannon fodder. The Ukrainian government, on the other hand, continued its calls for Russian men summoned to fight in Ukraine to lay down their arms as protests against the expedition continued in Russia, and the Russian officials sought to prevent war-age Russian men from fleeing the country. In Russia, especially after the mobilization, chaos began to prevail and no one in Russia had any confidence in either the government or the army. The Russian locals are waiting, seriously confused about what to do. Citizens who do not leave Russia and stay in their country can only organize anti-mobilization protests in order to show their reactions. Because the ruthless leader Vladimir Putin has created a regime within the borders of Russia that cuts all the voices that may oppose him. This regime created by Putin, which is dominated by oppression and violence and includes the one-man model, tortures citizens in Russia who give their rights to Ukraine every day. There are over 3,000 Russian citizens who participated in protest actions and were arrested in Russia. In the minority republics of the Russian Federation, the number of those who opposed the mobilization and were taken to the military assembly centers by the Russian Guard regiments is too high to be underestimated. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky knew how to best and logically evaluate Putin's grave mistake that had plunged his people into great turmoil. In fact, this was a golden opportunity for the liberation of Ukraine and the Russian people, and he did not miss this opportunity. Zelensky presented the Russians with incredible opportunities, inviting them not to join the atrocities and senseless war in Ukraine, with a supportive statement to oppose mobilization. This was a major blow to Putin's dehumanizing dreams and Wonderland plan. Zelensky urged the Russians to surrender themselves to the Ukrainian troops as prisoners of war, and also assured those who surrendered that the provisions of the Geneva Convention would be applied. Zelensky's statements were quite impressive and promising. Fight against this murderous Russian mobilization that wants to send your children to death, the Ukrainian leader said. Because if you come to take the lives of our children, I will tell you this as a father, we will not leave you alive, he said. Sensing a glimmer of hope after Zelensky's statements, Russian citizens had an opportunity to get rid of Putin's brutal regime. In addition to Zelensky, the Ukrainian armed forces embraced the Russians who wanted to get rid of the oppressive power of the Russian administration by activating the hotline called I Want to Live for Russian citizens and Russian soldiers. These developments, which shook the world agenda, greatly humiliated Russian leader Vladimir Putin in the world political arena. Because the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, thinks of Russian citizens as much more than Vladimir Putin. In addition to all these steps, Ukraine continued its attacks against the Russian army at full speed. Ukrainian heroes have recaptured thousands of lands from Russian troops this month. In recent weeks, the heroic Ukrainian army, which has regained its sovereignty, including in the city of Liman in the eastern Donetsk region, succeeded in punishing the invading troops one by one to the border. The heroes of Ukraine, especially on the southern fronts of the country, increased their pressure and began to not let the Russians breathe. In this way, a noticeable progress was made in the number of Russian soldiers surrendering to the Ukrainian army. Soldiers in the Russian army began to think that surrendering to the Ukrainian armed forces was the only way out, as they no longer had any hope for the Ukrainian war. And right now, according to data from the last 24 hours, most of the Russian lines on the Ukrainian positions have collapsed, and on the fronts of the Ukrainian territory, the burned debris of Russian tanks has filled the streets. The Russian soldiers who witnessed this scene understand very well that the Ukrainian war only harmed Russia as their morale fell to the bottom. The only person who does not understand this situation is Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The ruthless dictator Putin, who did not witness the bitterest and most heartbreaking scenes of the war and sunk the son of thousands of Russian soldiers for his selfish purposes, still continues to collect volunteers for the Russian army, who will die on the territory of Ukraine with the decision of mobilization. The Russian defense minister, on the other hand, made a new statement regarding the mobilization decision as a partner in Putin's murder plan. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu stated that the number of volunteer citizens to be mobilized to the Russian army will increase, and the dispatch of soldiers to be mobilized to Ukraine will be accelerated. After these statements, the number of protests against the mobilization decision across Russia increased 5 times. Many of the citizens who are demonstrating in Russia think that Ukraine is right in this war, and many Russian citizens see the statements of Ukrainian President Zelensky as a beacon of hope. Russian citizens almost trust the Ukrainian President Zelensky more than Vladimir Putin. In addition to the protests that took place across Russia, the attacks on 2 military registration centers and the escalation of border lines in Russia in the past weeks have increased the tension considerably. An unknown person opened fire on a Russian troop collection station in Siberia, and a Russian commander was seriously injured during the incident. About an hour after this attack, a car crashed into the entrance of the same Russian troop concentration center, and the people in the car threw Molotov cocktails at the building and set the military assembly center on fire. After these developments, the Russian people continued to accelerate their exit from the country. Queues of 25 kilometers formed at the border gates of Russia with Georgia and Kazakhstan. Russian citizens desperately crushed each other to leave the country. The scenes at the Russian border gates were completely telling the human drama of the Russian administration. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, not being ashamed of all these negative things he had done and the huge losses he had inflicted on Russia, found the courage to announce the annexation decision for the 4 regions of Ukraine. Russia's annexation decision, which was rejected by many world states, went out before it even started, because the heroic Ukrainian army, Zelensky's Lions, made incredible progress in all 4 regions that the Russian administration decided to annex, namely Kherson, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk. In this way, Russian leader Vladimir Putin managed to disgrace himself again by causing the annexation decision to be invalidated in world politics. Now the Ukrainian heroes have reached the Crimea, almost completely dominating the south of the country. Crimea and its surroundings are important enough for both leaders to turn into a life-and-death war. I think the words of the Ukrainian leader Zelensky for Crimea are quite resolute and sufficient. The president of Ukraine uses the following words in every statement about Crimea, of which he states that the real owner is Ukraine. The war started in Crimea and will end in Crimea. The sentence, which has deep meanings and when you listen to it over and over again, gives goosebumps to those who hear it. Zelensky and Russian leader Putin's assertive attitudes about Crimea indicate that a lot of blood will be shed in this region in the course of the war, because Crimea is the key city of the war and one of the rare regions where Ukrainian heroes do not make history. Now Zelensky's Lions have an opportunity to make history in the Crimea. For the first time since the beginning of the war on February 24th, the brave Ukrainian soldiers came this close to Crimea, and it looks like the Ukrainian armed forces will do everything to use this chance. If the Ukrainian army continues to receive the support of the USA and its Western allies, it's inevitable that the Ukrainian government will take Crimea, as all the states of the world think. We will see together what will happen in this region in the future. Take very good care of yourself for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to be notified of new videos.